Oliveira, Oliveira Lawyers. Today is Sunday, May the 4th, 3:30 Rio de Janeiro time, and we are starting one more live stream. I can see that we have a few of our friends over here. I hope our, video and sound are working as they should. And let's start by taking a look at the news. Let's share, the news. We usually take a look at UOL. If you want to know about Brazilian news, UOL is one of the options. It is one of the largest portals in Brazil, and it is somewhat oriented as the New York Times in terms of political orientation. They are also pretty sizable, and therefore they have a really nice coverage throughout Brazil. And interesting to note, today's main headline is about President Trump, right? And interesting to note, you don't even see any news about President Lula, Brazil's president. But President Trump is pretty consistent in the top 5 headlines that you're going to see on a daily basis at UOL, and actually not just UOL, but pretty much every single main media in Brazil. And the news says Trump says he doesn't know if he should respect or follow the U.S. Constitution to deport immigrants. The U.S. president is pushing the United States justice system to expel foreign citizens without due process. Okay, so that's the news. Just as usual, right? Like Brazilians are pretty attached to the United States in general. And nowadays, more than ever, President Trump, if you will. Let's take a look and see if we have any participations, any suggestions for a topic to be discussed. We have a Bill. Oi, Luciano, ready to go. Thank you, Bill. Thank you for letting us know. Bill is always on the lookout, helping us get a nice live stream. Didi, oi, bom dia. Bom dia, Didi. Good to see you around. And we also have Pedro. Pedro ADSW. Boa tarde, Pedro. Good to see you again. So far, the regulars. So far, thank you guys for coming back. And let me start by picking a question here from our backlog. All right, so I'm not sure if I should buy a property in Brazil. I've been following your live stream, and it looks like there are many red tape and bureaucracy, challenges. I like Brazil. I do travel to Brazil every now and then, but not sure if I should buy a property or not. Yeah, so the idea is that, there are many upsides to Brazil. And if you come into Brazil, if you do have some type of personal relationship to the country, buying property may make sense. Many foreign citizens, they are going to buy a property, they are going to run some type of short-term rental like Airbnb. Booking.com is also pretty popular in Brazil, even more than Airbnb, by the way. And, we have many clients with a consistent stream of income. I like to say if a financial return is your number one concern, probably not a good idea to buy property in Brazil. You could, potentially invest in real estate funds and enjoy the financial returns without the risk, without, all the red tape and time that you're going to spend on buying a property. But if you want to have, a place in Brazil that you can tell your friends, you can tell your family, that you can be proud of, and have some return on top of that, then yes, I think it does make sense. Okay, so bottom line, in my opinion, never just for the investment alone, but, if for you, from a personal perspective, owning a property in Brazil is going to be something that's going to bring you joy, then yes, by all means, go ahead and buy a property in Brazil, okay? Yes, there is red tape, but that's why law firms like us and other law firms are available, to reduce the burden on your side and make this journey more feasible, if you will. All right, Aaron, welcome, Aaron. How would the deportations from Brazil work? If we overstay our welcome, do we get a trial or just get a fine and shove it on a plane? Aaron, so deportations are kind of rare, right, in Brazil, unless you have, like some type of criminal record, right? Like, I mean, if you have a burglary, rape, this type of serious charges, yes, they could actually, send you to jail, and eventually, from jail to send you back to the United States. Okay, now, if you don't have criminal records, usually if they kind of seize you, they are gonna actually enforce a fine, and they are going to give you 60 days, 60 days to leave Brazil, right? The 60 days rule is very interesting. It is in the framework of Brazilian immigration. Nowadays, and I think we spoke about that during our last live stream on last Sunday. And the idea was that, particularly in Rio de Janeiro, because foreign citizens are kind of learning this trick, the Brazilian Federal Police, they are starting to withhold the opportunity for you to pay the fine because, foreign citizens are learning, well, I can overstay, and then I just show up over there, I pay the fine, and I get an additional 60 days, right? So it's kind of compensating or rewarding people for bad behavior, and therefore they are kind of withholding this opportunity, right? Like if you show up at the Brazilian Federal Police and you say, well, my bad, I overstayed here, now I want to pay the fine, they're going to say, you know what? When you leave the country, you pay the fine. And the idea here is that you're not going to get the additional 60 days, right? So if you show up with a boarding pass showing that you are leaving the country tomorrow, they would most probably allow you to pay the fine today because they know you're not going to stay for an additional 60 days in the country. Okay, but very rare, like for deportations to occur. Something that is much more common, it is for you to be denied entry. And when you are denied entry, technically, there is no deportation. Deportation occurs once you have been admitted into the country. So if you stay in Brazil for over 180 days, meaning that you have exhausted your immigration year in Brazil, and then a couple of months down the line, you try to enter Brazil, 99% chance that you're going to be denied entry. But again, this is not a deportation. That's just like the Brazilian immigration saying, listen, you don't have available days, and therefore you're not going to be admitted into Brazil. And they are not gonna handcuff you or anything. They are just gonna keep you in a certain area of the airport in which you're gonna be, able to, for instance, buy a return fare or, change the date. Let's say if you have a return ticket for a couple of weeks down the line, they are gonna give you some time for you to call, the operator of the airlines and change the date so you can return immediately to the United States. Okay, that's usually the procedure. In some cases, they may allow you to go to a hotel, but it's a kind of weird type of status because you're not being admitted, even though you are allowed to go to a hotel, usually under the responsibility of the airlines in which you came to Brazil. All right. Aaron, I hope that was helpful. DD says, I am in the US, a US citizen. I need to order my mother's birth certificate from Sao Paulo. They said I can order from Cartório Electronic, safe to pay online. So there are, DD, there are a couple of routes. One route is for you to order directly from the cartório, from the registry in which your mother has a birth certificate. Another route is for you to use a website in Brazil that offers birth certificates, right? This kind of aggregator that connects several cartórios or registries, they're going to ask you for your CPF. Now, I don't recall if they are going to ask you to pay through Pix. And if they ask you to pay through Pix, then you need to have a Brazilian bank account to pay for that. They also do not accommodate exceptions, like it should be a standard birth certificate. Usually you need to have the information for her birth certificate, like the recording number, the registry in which she was recorded, and so on. But if you're dealing with either the registry in charge of the records or this aggregator that is going to connect the several registries, usually, yes, it is safe to pay online, right? Like my concern is that as a U.S. citizen, sometimes you don't really know if a certain or a specific website is legitimate or not. But let's put it this way. If you're dealing with the real thing, then yes, I mean, we do use like those tools every now and then. Many times we're going to use a registry that is located closer to our São Paulo office. Sometimes in Rio de Janeiro, we need to go physically to the registry, like registries in Rio de Janeiro. Unfortunately, they are behind the entire country, at least for registries of births, marriages, divorces, and death. But for most of the states, we actually go to a registry that is closer to our São Paulo office, and we order through a partnership we have with that registry. Okay, Didi, I hope that was helpful. We have a Pedro. You previously mentioned that property sellers prefer cash buyers. Why do you think this is? A realtor friend in Brazil told me that bank mortgages are very normal in Brazil. Now, what are your option? Right. So, Pedro, that's usually whenever you have, well, first thing, right? Like, I mean, not talking about foreign citizens buying or a Brazilian. Whenever you deal with a mortgage, there's going to be a timeline for the mortgage, right? I'm going to give you an example. Most Brazilians, they are going to use Caixa Econômica Federal, as the mortgage provider. And Caixa Econômica Federal, they may take up to 3 months for a mortgage to be paid to the seller, right? So just right there, I think you have your answer, okay? So if you have a cash buyer, you could typically have a closing in 45, 60 days. If you have like a typical Brazilian buyer with a mortgage from Caixa, very often the timeline is going to exceed, 90 days, right? So sellers, naturally, they don't want to wait for 90 days. Sometimes they have something lined up. They are going to buy another property. And therefore, if you have a cash buyer, all the complexity from the mortgage side is going to go away, okay? Now, it is true. I mean, particularly, again, if you're dealing with Brazilians, like a Brazilian seller and a Brazilian buyer, a mortgage is just part of life, right? Because most Brazilians, they are not cash buyers. And so imagine think about a seller who has never sold a property to a foreign citizen or to a cash buyer. In his head, the 90-day timeline is just going to be part of life. So it also depends on the seller. But let's say sellers in Rio de Janeiro, particularly, they are somewhat exposed to foreign citizens in a higher degree than you're going to be in different states in Brazil. Okay, so yes, cash buyers are always better appreciated by sellers, but there is nothing wrong with mortgage. Now, mortgage to foreign citizen is another story because foreign citizens usually they don't have a credit history. They have income that cannot be easily confirmed by Brazilian banks, and therefore very difficult for foreign citizens to obtain a mortgage unless they are buying a property of a large amount and they are paying a substantial part of the price. Here at the firm, I would say 95% of our clients, they are cash basis buyers, all right? Marisa Navas, boa tarde, Dr. Luciano. Boa tarde, Marisa, Ricardo. Always good to see you both over here. I appreciate the support. Jackson Fox, welcome back, Jackson. Jackson says, bom dia. Can you speak on the new visa requirements and BRICS? Are you hearing anything about BRICS versus US dollar in Brazil? So, yes, the new visa requirements, it is the e-visa, Jackson, so it's not something that is going to necessarily require you to go to a consulate, meaning most people, they are going to be able to get the e-visa through an online application, okay? Online application. I can show to you here real quick. It's not something difficult. You just come over here, Brazil e-visa. All right. I recommend you to first pick the official Brazilian website. Brazilian official website from the government. The federal government is gov.br. When you click over here, that's actually not the e-visa application portal, but by going through this page, you know that you are on the right track. My concern is that you may be taken to a different website that's not the real one. So by going first to the Brazilian website, you kind of increase your chances that you're going to get to the real thing. Once you are here, you're going to see the link to the VFS. VFS company. VFS is a private party hired by the Brazilian government to handle the e-visa application. So this is the portal. Okay, you basically come here, apply e-visa, and you can have this application started. The fee last time I checked it was $80.90. $80 goes to Brazil, 90 cents goes to VFS. Okay, and everything in theory could be handled online through this portal. There are exceptions, right? Like, I mean, if they find something funky about your information, or there is someone else with your name, with the same name as yours, and this person had some trouble in the past, guess what? They're gonna say, well, you are unable to secure a visa through the e-visa portal, and therefore you need to go to a consulate, right? So I would guess between 10 to 15%, or maybe between 10 to 20% of the applicants, they are not going to be able to complete this application, and instead they are going to be sent to a physical consulate, because then the consulate is going to be better positioned to troubleshoot your application. Okay, so this is the portal. In terms of requirements, they have, like low requirements for the visitor visa, for the visitor e-visa. For pleasure, if it is just for pleasure or tourism, you're going to need to show that you have $2,000 available. And the e-visa, at least as far as I remember, is going to be restricted to citizens from the US, Canada, and Australia, right? So if you're from Africa, for instance, we have many followers from, countries in which they naturally want to migrate to Brazil for a better life. There is, Nigeria, Bangladesh, India, there is Haiti, right? All of those countries, they don't have access to the e-visa. For all of those countries, you need to follow the traditional route of scheduling an interview in a Brazilian consulate or the consulate branch of a Brazilian embassy. If we're talking about, for instance, Haiti or the United Arab Emirates and many other countries. And in this case, you usually need to show up in person with your documents. And to be honest with you, they usually deny a visa to most applicants from those countries because, again, most applicants from those countries, they are really not interested in visiting Brazil for tourism. They are actually trying to migrate to Brazil through a, like visitor's visa, which is not the purpose of such a visa. All right, let's take a look at what else we have. All right, BRICS versus US dollar in Brazil. Jackson, yes, there is this whole discussion, right? Like, particularly now with President Trump in command of the United States, BRICS are trying to kind of evade the US dollar as a global currency, right? So, particularly the Brazilian president, President Lula, he has always hated the United States, not just President Trump, right? But the United States as a country. And President Lula and some of his friends, right, like prior president Dilma Rousseff, they even, not President Lula, but Dilma Rousseff, I don't recall the specifics, but I know that they kidnapped, like personnel from the U.S. government, like during the 60s or the 70s. I think, there was even someone shot dead in one of their operations, right? So I think that now with President Trump in power, it makes easier, right? Like for Russia, China is being antagonized by the tariffs. Brazil, who has a president who hates the United States guts. So that makes easier for all of those countries to organize themselves to circumvent the US dollar as a global currency, if you will. So trying to have reserves in a Chinese currency or some type of other currency, maybe the euro, not an easy task because, like it or not, the US currency remains as the global currency. So yes, Jackson, like we do hear very often that President Lula is always, like bringing this topic over to the BRICS whenever, Russia, China, and Brazil are meeting, like we should depart. The US dollar is not in our best interest. Let's use something else as a global currency. Really interesting topic, Jackson. Charing Mitchell, Charing, good day to you as well. Good to see you back. We have, I would assume, correct me if I'm wrong, a Korean friend over here. I'm sorry, but I don't know how to pronounce your name. How long before applying for Nomad visa should I make bank statement? All right, so usually we try to apply with recent bank statements. Here at the firm, if we're gonna apply for you in June, let's say June the 1st, we're gonna try to have a bank statements from April, March, and February, right? If that makes sense, because if we are applying usually in June, your May bank statement may not be available. So traditionally, we try to work with something as recent as possible. But because we also have the need for, translation, organizing the documents, usually it's not going to be the prior month, but actually the month before the prior month, if you will. And in Korea, I found we don't have exactly birth certificate. Instead, we have something called the basic certificate, which states a person's birth date and whatnot. Would that be enough? Listen, Brazil is going to be pretty reasonable in a sense that they are going to ask you what you can provide. So if what you can provide is the basic certificate and not a birth certificate, I think just the change of name is not going to be meaningful, if you will. Now, your basic certificate should have, of course, basic information about you, such as your full name, your date of birth, where you were born, like the city, state, if there are states in Korea, of course, the Korea country name, and most importantly, your parents' names, right? The whole purpose of asking you for a birth certificate is not to find out when you were born, but to make sure that the Brazilian government knows your parents' names, okay? So if your basic certificate has all of that information, if the basic certificate is being issued by the official government of Korea, and if you get an apostille on that document, yes, we expect this document to work just fine. Brazil Vibes, welcome back, Brazil Vibes. Good to see you over here. Boa tarde, Miss Oliveira. Could you please go over the details for the Brazil Tourist Visa? There is misinformation about the $2,000 requirement in a bank account. Muito obrigado. Brazil Vibes, thank you for asking. So let's take another look. Let's take another look at the application form. Maybe that's going to help you understand the requirements. So we are back to this screen. Right? Usually they have another, yes, they have here the requirements. So we are going over the requirements. Right? So the visa application form, which is completed online, the passport, which is going to be scanned naturally. Here they say a color scan of the bio page of your passport without any glare or fingers on it. The glare is usually a pain in the neck because whenever you have some light or when you're trying to take a good a picture of your passport, the camera, your cell phone, it could, have some glares on it. So you may need to try several times until you have something that has no glare on it, okay? But it's a must. If you send something that's not completely clear, they are gonna actually ask you to take a new picture. And if you keep sending bad pictures, they could eventually deny your application. All right, let's take a look if they address. Yeah, so the business visa, that's the more complicated version. You're going to see that they ask a ton of information, including like places in which you're going to visit in Brazil. So the business version is substantially more complex. Amount remains the 80-90 that I told you guys. All right, let's take a look. Let's take a look at the amount. It's not showing over here. Maybe at the FAQ. Eligibility. $2,000. Let's see where they are addressing that. Yeah, they're not really saying, at least from a quick view, but there is, I know that there is a requirement, right? Like the financial requirement, they are usually asking you to have $2,000 somewhere. Okay, you should have $2,000 somewhere. So maybe what we can try to do now that the e-visa is live and kicking, we may actually try to have a video, like walking you guys through the application, right? I'm gonna discuss with Patrick. Patrick is our head of immigration services, and see if we can get a walkthrough recorded on a screen to share with you guys. All right, Brazil Vibes. I hope that was helpful. Now, in terms of showing the 2000, what they want to see is that you have a 2000 available in your bank account. Based on other visas, we know that they don't want to see, stuff such as a 401k. They don't want to see Vanguard. They don't want to, see CD applications. They want to see, liquid money in your checking account, if you will. I think, because the threshold is not high, I think that $2,000 should be in your checking account, not even a savings account, if that makes sense. All right, Brazil Vibes. Usually I recommend, the consolidated monthly bank statement. Some people, for some reason, sometimes they send a screenshot. A screenshot is not a great way of showing your bank statement to the Brazilian government. I usually recommend you to download a PDF file of your consolidated monthly bank statement. All right, that's my recommendation. And by the way, I just saw it. Thank you so much for the coffee. Brazil Vibes is sponsoring some coffee. I'm be glad to have some coffee sponsored by Brazil Vibes. Thank you so much, Brazil Vibes. So let me know if, this sharing about, the bank statement, about the minimum of $2,000, if that's helpful. Now, maybe another nuance is that, of course, you don't want to show just $2,000. Like if you have a $5,000, if you have a $7,000, the better, right? Like the more money, less concerning your application is going to be. But yes, you should have at least $2,000 available in a bank account. If you have it 3,000, you're going to be good. If you have five, even better. All right, Brazil Vibes. Thank you again for the coffee. And our Korean friend, Between, this is Tony that you talked to online the other day. Really nice to see you over here, Tony. Thank you for showing up. Tony, and just letting you know, you are free to participate as much as you want over here. Very glad to see you in our live stream, Tony. Marisa Navas, estamos amando sua live. We are really enjoying your live stream. Thank you, Marisa. Thank you, Marisa and Ricardo. Really appreciate your presence over here. Adabi Tony, good day, sir. Good day, Adabi. Welcome to our live stream. Aaron, if I'm buying pre-construction from a builder, does being a cash buyer help? Or will their pre-launch pricing be fairly set in stone? Aaron, for pre-construction, they do offer some discounts, okay? There is always room for discount. Whatever price list they present, usually is not set in stone, even if you don't pay much, right? Even if you just pay the traditional 20%, or 10% of the asking price, there is still room for negotiation, okay? Now, a very common follow-up question is going to be, well, if I prepay the entire thing, am I able to get a deeper discount? And the answer is, of course. If you're not paying much at the beginning and you can still get a discount, what you say about paying a lot, up front, or maybe the entire thing up front, you're going to be able to get a substantially higher discount. Now, this said, I myself, who buy pre-construction every now and then, I buy as a person pre-construction properties in Brazil every now and then. I will never pay more than 30% of the asking price. And the reason for that is because I am old enough to know that every 20 or so years there's going to be some type of serious economic situation in Brazil that's going to lead developers to have a trouble delivering what you're buying, okay? So I'm not saying that this is going to happen to you. Most probably would not happen, But my take is that if there is a global war, a real global war, right? I'm not just talking about, like Gaza and Israel. I'm not just talking about Ukraine and Russia. But if there is a larger conflict, I guarantee the vast majority of developers in Brazil, they are going to go bankrupt, okay? So not guarantee, but I would say most probably than not, if we have a serious world crisis and money stops coming in, probably most developers, they are going to go bankrupt, or if not bankrupt, guess what? They are not going to continue to build anything. They're just going to sit on their hands and wait to see what's going to happen. So my strategy is not to chase big discounts, and instead I want to get the best discount I can get with a lower payment, and then pay as the construction progresses, because this way I'm never going to be in a situation in which I paid more than what I could get. Or let's put it this way, most of the money that I usually pay when I buy pre-construction, I'm going to pay once the unity is available for delivery. All right, that's my strategy, Aaron. And listen, I see other people doing different, right? Like, I mean, this is my strategy, but we do have clients who say, you know what, like, I mean, I'm basically, considering there's not going to be a global war. I see this Brazilian developer, they've been delivering things for 20 years without a fail, and I'm willing to bet that everything is going to be all right. I'm going to prepay the entire thing, and I'm going to get, on top of the discount that you, Luciano, is getting, I'm going to get an additional 10%, and I'm happy to take some risk. All right, Aaron, so there you go. Two different strategies, one focused on, getting a bigger discount, and another strategy focused on reducing risk, right? You need to see what is your style and follow through. Pedro, we need more likes for this live stream. This is a blessing. We need to say thank you to the algorithm. I really appreciate your words, Pedro. We try to work hard to share the knowledge. And yes, if you guys can, please, click the like button, click the follow button. Yes, this is going to be good for our business, and this is going to be good for other people who are going to find this content based on the likes, right? Really appreciate Pedro. Yui, good to see you. What is the timeline to get citizenship passport after 1 year from residency from União Estável? Are different states faster? Is there some Gov website to check live timelines or track your case? Yui, there is no timelines, right? And you may be thinking about the United States. The United States, they have a kind of, I'm not sure if it is quarterly, I think it's on a monthly basis. The United States is going to issue what they call a visa bulletin, right? The visa bulletin is going to give you different timelines for different tracks in terms of immigration, okay? But Brazil does not have anything like this. There is no site for you to actually track how long it's going to take. And let's say the main aspects of applying for citizenship based on União Estável. So once you have União Estável, first thing you're going to do is going to be applying for permanent residency. This journey could take between 2 to 4 months in our experience. Once you secure the União Estável or stable union or common law marriage, 4 months, usually for you to get the resident status. Once you have the resident status, 1 year down the line, that's when you can apply for citizenship, right? And don't forget, you need to have an advanced level of Portuguese, right? Like spoken, written, and everything in between, right? Like it's a a demanding test in which you're going to need to communicate, to speak, to listen, to write, to read, and you need to be again in an advanced level of communication in Portuguese, right? I think this is the main factor why most foreign citizens, even though they are either married to a Brazilian or if they have a child who's Brazilian, or if they have like a common law marriage or so-called união estável, it's still difficult for them to secure that in just a year. All right, Yui. But once you apply, in our experience, our clients get the citizenship confirmation between 6 months to 9 months. All right, after they apply, after they are ready to apply for the citizenship. Matthew Oliveira, support from Frisco, Texas. Thank you, Matthew. So good to see you over here. Thank you for your support. I really appreciate it. Mary Lou Henry. Welcome, Mary Lou. Good afternoon, sir. Always enjoying your broadcast. Thank you for your advice. Thank you, Mary Lou. Thank you for your support. Such a great live stream today. I really appreciate your participation, all of you, and your encouragement is certainly appreciated. Bill, yeah, Pedro, we all know that Luciano gives a lot of great info. Yes, appreciate Bill. So good to hear from you guys. And in the meantime, let's take one more participation from our offline backlog. All right. Now, with the new administration in the United States, do you think Brazil could reduce the immigration pathways available to U.S. citizens? Okay, I heard that question before. Because of all the aggravation, right? Many Brazilians, whenever traveling to the U.S., they are enduring, additional challenges at the border whenever entering the United States, and therefore, in theory, Brazil could try to retaliate. So I think that from a formal perspective, meaning that, let's say, Brazil would remove the United States from, the digital nomad or the real estate investor track, I don't think any of that would happen. However, one thing is for sure, right? Like the e-visa, remember that Brazil was trying to get the e-visa in place for a couple of years at least, right? Like Brazil, or more specifically, President Lula, our federal administration, he tried 3 times before that, and he couldn't have this thing passed. Now, with all the aggravation, right, with all the news, like with all the headlines, guess what? He was able to pass the e-visa regulation, right? So I think that the e-visa is more representative of what Brazil is doing, not necessarily against the United States, but more like in terms of reciprocity, right? Like saying, all right, if the United States is going to give our citizens such a hard time, we can also do something to that effect, right? So the e-visa, of course, is not nearly as cumbersome or time-consuming as it is for a Brazilian to get a visa to visit the United States. But still, Brazil, is getting $80 per application. Brazil is doing some additional vetting. So there you go. The e-visa is probably one of the outcomes of the new administration in the United States, the Trump administration, right? Another thing that I think it's happening, it's like a less willingness from the Brazilian immigration, at the border, at border control, to give a break to U.S. citizens who have overstayed their allowed time. Okay, I'm gonna give an example. in the past, someone would stay, in Brazil for over 180 days, meaning that they would kind of exhaust their allowed time for their immigration year. And sometimes by mistake, right? Not necessarily on purpose, they would come to Brazil, like mixing up dates or, like calculations. And believe it or not, the Brazilian immigration would sometimes give them a break and let them enter the country, particularly if this foreign citizen, if this U.S. citizen would, like kind of enter into a an affirmation that he would secure something like the digital nomad, right? Like the Brazilian immigration would say, listen, you don't have enough time. And then the U.S. citizen would say, oh, all right, like, can I do something like apply for, I don't know, digital nomad or buy a property to be able to stay? And the Brazilian Federal Police would kind of give them a break. He would be sitting like in the border control for a few hours, but eventually he would be allowed entry in Brazil. Now, nowadays, we are not seeing that happening anymore. If you have been in Brazil for over 180 days in your immigration year and you try to enter Brazil before your immigration year is renewed, guess what? They are not going to let you enter the country. And I think that it may be a consequence of the more stringent U.S. immigration when it comes to Brazilians. All right, so these are the outcomes, but as you can see, they are not nearly as serious as removing U.S. citizens from the digital nomad program or the real estate investment program. It's more like subtle or minor changes to the disadvantage of U.S. citizens. But again, I don't think they are meaningful, all right? I think they are more like, what? You're being tougher on our citizens, and we're not gonna, give you breaks anymore. Now you really need to follow the guidelines of the Brazilian immigration framework, all right? So I think from that perspective, it's something positive, and naturally, Brazil does need, like money that is being brought by, U.S. citizens, Canadians, and Australians alike. All right, we have Moses. Welcome, Moses. Please, I have a long question. Kindly read all before you answer. It comes in 5 messages. Who pays tax on rental income? Is the tax paid by the person? Right. I just had a glitch here in our chat window. Let me see if I can restore the chat window. Hi there. Not sure if we had some type of issue. It looks like now it's all good. I was reading Moses' question about who pays on rental income. Is the tax paid by the person who receives the rent in their account or by the name registered on the property? If I decide to move to São Paulo with my family, through residency by investment, buying 4-studio apartments in Moema worth 1.6 million to obtain residency in Brazil. As a tax resident, I bought the 4 studios in my own name and then decided to hand over 2 of the properties to my wife. The rents go to her account as her only income of 7,000 reais and the other 2. Right, so let's see if I can answer some of those questions, Moses. Typically, I don't like to answer taxation questions because they are usually linked to many different aspects, right? Like, just like in the United States, I don't know from which country you are, Moses, but, just as an example, like in the United States, Usually, whenever you have a tax question, this answer is going to depend on different factors, right? It's not like a single factor. This is going to drive a single answer. Like you need to look at different things to them understand your taxation situation. So in Brazil, that's the same thing. Like we have some principles that are going to be applied, but the calculations or the end result of the taxation aspect is going to depend on the specific. So I'm going to give you, probably not. I'm going to give you some feedback, not as specific as you probably would like to hear, but hopefully something that is going to help you advance your understanding. Okay, Moses. And there are CPAs in Brazil specializing in foreign citizens, and I would recommend you to book a consultation with a tax advisor because if taxation is something major for your planning, it's certainly worth the investment. All right. So if you need a referral for a tax advisor, a tax CPA, send us a message, and we're gonna share with you a referral for a tax attorney. All right. That's my recommendation to you, Moses. That's too serious to have this answered like in full in our live stream. But let's proceed, right? So the first thing, the person in charge of paying the tax is going to be the person of record, right? The person of record. So let's say if taxes on the rental income is not paid, like the ultimate person who's going to be chased for those taxes is the person who owns the title, okay? So that's how it works. Now, whenever you are renting, there are two different scenarios. One scenario, you are a tax resident in Brazil. Another scenario, you're not a tax resident in Brazil. Now, if you're pursuing the real estate investor track, I'm going to assume that you're going to live in Brazil, and therefore you're going to be taxed just like myself or other Brazilians, right? Meaning that you are a tax resident. When you are a tax resident and living in Brazil, you're going to pay the taxes even though the property is being rented by someone else. So the property is rented by someone else. This person is going to pay the rent to you, and you're going to be in charge of reporting the income to the tax authority and pay the taxes on that property, okay? Now, when you say, I'm going to hand over properties to my wife, in Brazil, usually people don't do that because there is no such a thing as handing over a property. If you're going to have this property on your wife's name, guess what? You're going to need to sell the property to her, which is kind of weird, right? Because she's your wife. But in order for you to change the records at the cartório, you will need to change those things as well, pay additional taxes, and eventually have a transaction between you and your wife. Now, just like I told you, usually there are many factors that one thing is going to ask for another information to be provided. It also depends on the type of marriage that you have, because for some types of marriage, you cannot sell shares between spouses. For other types of marriages, yes. So even the marriage regime or the marriage features, if you will, are going to impact on that aspect as well, Moses. All right, I hope that was helpful. And Ozan Array, oi Luciano, tudo bem? Thanks for your efforts and live sessions. Great info sharing, appreciated. Thank you for participating, Ozan. Ozan says, I came to Brazil in 2018 via employer's sponsorship, got my permanent residency in 2020, and left Brazil in 2023, keeping my RNM still active via visits, but to be renewed in 2029. Very interesting. This is a route that is also available, right? It's also available to foreign citizens, even though you need a sponsor, right? So just analyzing here what Ozan said, he came in 2018, basically, as someone who was invited to work in Brazil. When you come under that circumstance, you get a temporary residency, and after 2 years, if you still have the sponsorship, you have an option to renew as a permanent residency. Pretty big deal, right, Ozan? So right now, Ozan has the RNM, and to be renewed in 2029. Having no employer or domicile in Brazil anymore. How to approach the RNM extension process in 2029. All right, so there is another very interesting track, Ozan, that it happens or is available whenever you want to renew your permanent residency, and the original basis for your permanent residency is no longer around, right? I'm going to give you another example that's going to make easier for you to understand, but that I think it would be applicable to your case as well. If you marry a Brazilian, right? If you have união estável, another example from today's live stream, you are qualified to apply for the permanent residency, and then you apply for permanent residency. You live in Brazil for at least 2 years. Let's say on the third year, for some reason, you divorce from your spouse, or you end the união estável. That's going to be on the third year, right? At that point in time, your permanent residency based on marriage is no longer valid. Okay, of course, if you don't inform the Brazilian immigration, they just gonna keep as is. But eventually, when you try to renew, guess what? They're gonna say, "Well, are you still married?" And you say, "No, I'm not married." Right? They are not gonna renew your permanent residency. But on the third year after your divorce, you can actually apply for permanent residency based on the fact that you lived 2 years as a permanent residency in Brazil, and the conditions for that original permanent residency are no longer in place, right? So you see, you got the permanent residency, you live it for a couple of years, third year you get divorced, and then you could apply for a new permanent residency, even though you're still a permanent resident, based on the fact that you no longer qualify for your permanent residency, right? Now, many people, they're going to say, well, I'm not going to touch that because I still have the card. My recommendation is for them to actually do apply for this new permanent residency, because this new one is going to be a standalone, meaning you're not going to depend on your prior spouse anymore. So here, if you apply the concept to the employment, that's the same thing. If you've been living, but the problem is, like here, it looks like you're not really living in Brazil, right, Ozan? So let's say if you come back to Brazil and you live it for a couple of years, and you say, listen, I've been living for a couple of years in Brazil under the permanent residency through employment, but I'm no longer employed. I want to renew I want to apply for a new permanent residency, but no longer based on the employment, but based on the fact that I've been living in Brazil as a permanent resident for at least 2 years. All right, Ozan. So that's more like an intro to the topic. Of course, you're going to have follow-up questions, but that's a track that you may want to investigate as a potential route, for a more longer-term permanent residency in Brazil. Moses, thank you, sir. Your live stream helped us foreigners a lot. You're welcome, Moses. Always glad to see you over here. And Yui, I heard you can get married online to a Brazilian. Is that true? Like meu cartório digital? If so, can I apply for online residency as well from outside of Brazil and then only arrive after start the clock? Yui, not really, right? Like for you to marry in Brazil, it's a super pain in the neck. Okay, usually whenever people want to do stuff online, they are gonna do truth. Like for those, of you who are a U.S. citizen, right? Like truth, Utah. Utah has a really nice a framework for people to marry online, right? Through a video conference. Many times, the U.S. citizen is in the U.S., the Brazilian is in Brazil. I saw, marriages before with both the U.S. citizen and the Brazilian citizen, both in Brazil, still marrying through Utah. Okay, that works pretty well. But to marry online in Brazil through meu cartório digital, not good. Okay, not good. I'm not saying it's impossible, but the red tape is massive. The papers that you're gonna need to present, they are gonna need an apostille. They are gonna ask you for a laundry list of documents to be apostilled, sworn translated, recorded in a different type of registry called RTD. Is just a huge pain in the neck, Yui. So it doesn't work. It just doesn't work like what you're saying, okay? Is not like that. You may also get a powerful attorney holder, and then, this is gonna help in a sense that someone else is gonna be doing the legwork in Brazil, but the someone else is still gonna be, handling massive red tape and bureaucracy. This thing about marriage, and for some states, like Rio de Janeiro, it becomes a nightmare, right? Like, in São Paulo, I don't know, Paraná, Brasilia, like these are some states in which they are trying to make this thing more, how can I say, I don't know, a little bit less painful for foreign citizens, but Rio de Janeiro traditionally, registries for marriage, birth, and divorce and death, they're just like way behind in terms of technology, and they are very attached to some requirements that are really tough for foreign citizens to meet. All right, so I don't think this is a recommended route. Again, I'm not saying it's impossible. It's just based on our experience. This is a major project, okay, if you will. All right, Yui. Everyone, like the video. Thanks so much, Yui. Ozan, clear, thanks. Thank you so much, guys. We are past our end time. Pretty happy to see 23 people following us right now as we speak. Legal stuff is not usually super popular, right? But I'm happy to see we have, people who are following us and participating in our live streams. I want to say thank you for all the likes. I want to invite you to participate in our next live stream that's going to occur on Wednesday. On Wednesday, we are meeting a little bit earlier in the day. We are meeting at 12:30 Rio de Janeiro time. We have created already the schedule, the appointment for this live stream, so you can come to our YouTube page and click on notify me, so you make sure you're not gonna miss our next live stream. Say thank you again to all of you, and you guys have a blessed rest of your Sunday.